This video is going to be focusing on what we call in theater the hemming stitch. It is, as the name implied, a great stitch for hemming. We use it for hemming on trousers. We also use it to hem skirts. It is a nice hem stitch because it does keep the hem very flat to the material so that we don't have to worry about heels getting caught on it or it being pulled away. It also is very imperceptible on the other side as our stitch is very small. If I was using a solid color thread that matched my fabric, as in a white thread, you would never see this. So let's get started. In order to do this stitch, I have already prepped myself with a number 10 millimeter thread, needle threaded with 100% polyester thread, and I'm using a dark color just so that we can see. I've also already treated this with a thread conditioner called Thread Heaven so that it smoothly runs through the fabric, and I need to put a knot in it. So I'm going to wrap that around my finger, roll it off, and then pull it tight. And then I'm going to trim that. I always leave a small knot or tail after the knot, and that's just so my knot doesn't slip off. If you cut right next to your knot, then your knot likely will slip off. Now the other thing that we need to prep in order to do this stitch is for our sample, we already have our hem prepped. So I just took my muslin and I folded it up about a 1/2 inch, and then I folded this up about another 1.25 inches. And so that I've created a sense of a hem. If you were doing this in a real garment, you should have already prepped this with your hem being pressed up. Now I like to stitch away from myself. You could also stitch right to left if you're right-handed, and so I am right-handed, so I'm going to be showing you how to do it from that direction. The first thing I'm going to need to do is I have the knot in my thread. I need to hide that knot in the hem. So I'm going to fold it back and I'm going to pull the needle up into the fold that is created at the top of my hem. So my knot is hidden under here. It is not seen on the exterior here, nor is it on the exterior of the right side of the garment. Now once I have this in there, I'm going to get started with the first stitch. So I'm going to come down about 1/4 inch. I'm going to grab a very small amount of exterior fabric, the right side of the garment, so you can see it's just 2 or 3 threads, and then I'm going to be coming up through about 1/8 inch of the folded hem, and then I'm going to come back down 1/4 inch. I'm going to grab 2 or 3 threads of the exterior fabric. I'm going to come back in about 1/16 of an eighth of an inch, somewhere in there, of my hem. 2 or 3 stitches, coming up 1/16 of an inch down. Whichever you do, just be consistent. You can make them a little bit further in, but you just want to make sure that you're keeping your stitch length the same and you're keeping the depth of your stitch consistent. It's all about consistency. Now if we look on the exterior of this, we have little tiny vertical dots, and we have our diagonal that is started along here, similar to the tailor based. Now every couple of inches, so now I've go a little bit further, but every 3 or 4 inches I like to do what I call anchor my stitch. Hems have a tendency to get pulled out very easily, especially with maybe someone wearing a pair of heels and their heel gets caught on the hem, and it can pull the stitch out. So in order to prevent my whole hem coming undone, once I've gone a few inches, and here I've gone almost about 4 inches, I'm actually going to just do a straight stitch over. And all that is doing is sort of creating a tiny knot there, so that if I am to have this come undone, it would hopefully only go to here and the rest of the hem would remain in the garment. And I do this on all my hand stitching with hems. So even if you're doing a slip stitch or you're doing a cross stitch, you need to anchor your stitch every few inches just to help prevent the whole hem coming undone. It's a good habit to get into. There's nothing more frustrating than doing a whole hem and then one thread gets pulled out and the entire hem comes undone. Sort of like the blind hemming stitches that they do on garments that you store by. So once I get to the end of my stitch, I need to knot this. So again, I'm going to just take a stitch right where I just came out, very small stitch, and that's just to anchor it, and then I'm going to take another stitch, creating my loop that I'm going to go through my hole 2 or 3 times. Oops, I just counteracted myself. Alright. There we go. And then I'm going to pull that tight so that knot is laying right next to my hem. Then I'm going to take another stitch between all my layers. Notice that this is not going on the exterior. This is only between the layers. And I'm going to pull that nice and tight. And what that does is it pulls my knot close to the fabric so it's not sticking out, and it's also hidden the tail so the tail is not exposed, further risking the knot coming undone. Then I'm going to trim that close, and there is my hemming stitch. Remember when you're doing the stitch not to pull too tight. You want to keep this laying really nice and flat. And then on the other side, notice how imperceptible my stitches are. They're ever so slight. And if I had been using a ivory colored thread, you would never see this on the exterior. And so that is our hemming stitch.